I used to work in a top secret war room in the U.S. Navy, and I can tell you that there's all kinds of stuff that goes on under the name of top secret. They also discovered, the church committee discovered, that they had were operating with a black budget, and they can only estimate, but the estimate is over $1 trillion a year. You can buy a lot of world press and manipulations in other countries for $1 trillion a year. Next picture, please. John Stockwell. He led the Angola War for the CIA and then decided to go public and try to expose the crimes of the CIA. He counted that by the time the church committee's hearing was over, that they had already committed, CIA had already committed 13,000 illegal covert operations. And that the committee also had found that there was 1,000 propagandistic books had already been published. So when the committee tried to get the names of the authors or the actual names of the books, they couldn't get them. The federal government could not get the names of the people who published what the names of the books were or the authors. Next picture, please. So in frustration, or part of his research, Stockwell coming clean, he wrote this annotated bibliography, which I have e-copies for at the end of the, if people want a copy of this, it's very worth reading. Anyway, what he writes is 120 short reviews of national security books. And I want to read just one clip from that. This one is what he wrote about Turning the Tide by Noam Chomsky. The U.S. brutal third world policies exist in terms of hegemony. Countries that try to escape domination must either be brought forcibly back under control or be crushed so they will not stand as positive examples, tempting others to break free. End of quote. I've read this book from cover to cover. It is a terrible account of state-sponsored terrorism. I couldn't read more than 2 pages at a time because of the horror, the atrocities in it. You don't need to go to a horror movie. All you have to do is pick up a copy of this book. Now, the rub of all this is, of course, that each one of these atrocities that he writes about, they're not in the media. You'll never hear anything about them. But whenever there's troops sent anywhere, then there's the big fanfare in the media that they're going to liberate somebody. It's for democracy or our national interest. Bumping up to 1986, this is a caricature of U.S. imperialism. This is a peasant standing in front of a huge Yankee cannon, and the point being basically that, what fighting chance does he have, right? So, Lieutenant Colonel, this year, 86, John Basevik, a West Point graduate and International Affairs Fellow with the Council of Foreign Relations, describes the motives of U.S. foreign policy, quote, "We can see today that the Army's primary task down to the present has continued to be precisely what it was in Korea. The application of force to maintain the global status quo that emerged from World War II. While the United States does not claim a formal empire, the Army since 1945 has played the historical role of an imperial force. But this would have to be presented to the public inoffensively, using terms suited to public political discourse, because an American army proclaiming itself to be an imperial police force would have trouble garnering public or congressional support." So notice Basevik is not trying to stop imperialism. He just wants to mask it. So 5 years later, a new president, George H.W. Bush, he couches it in slightly more subtle terms. I quote him, "Now we can see a new world coming into view, a world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The United States has a new credibility. What we say goes." What we say? So, going back, is he talking about the downtrodden, the bewildered herd? Or is he talking about his self-anointed demigods? We seldom focus on the history of imperialism. Now, what we have here, notice force, deception, secrecy, and war. All of them have these unidentifiable little words behind them. That root sign, these are actually the sounds of our ancestors Proto-Indo-European speakers. English is an Indo-European language, and it's a written language. But Proto-Indo-European is only spoken. We're going back to 5000 BC now. And through reconstructive linguistics, they've been able to find the commonalities of the roots, and these they were able to figure out are the sounds. So even back then, they had terms, and notice that war isn't quite what we know it today, but it was more to confuse and mix up. So now if we fast forward to today's CIA, as we see there's different terms that the CIA use. This is all about confusing and mixing up. Psychological, PSYOPs, that means psychological operations. And it also stands for psychological warfare. Dirty war, from the dirty tricks department, that's an actual title in the CIA. And then John Stockwell said that as he ran the Angola War, 30% of his staff worked full-time writing disinformation. And that was put into the media through media moles. CIA plants these moles in the media. In fact, they have one in at least all of the different organizations. When I was talking about $1 trillion, they have hundreds of news agencies around the world, and every one of them has a CIA mole in there helping to guide the policy of the production that they put out. Okay, let's go to the next slide then. Pax Americana 2000. PNAC, some of you probably know what that's an acronym for Project for the New American Century. This is written by the neoconservatives, and they call it Rebuilding America's Defenses, but I couldn't help but change the word to offenses because that's what it's really about. Because in there, in not too subtle terms, they say their objective is to dominate friend and foe of all countries. We had a Pax Romana and a Pax Britannica, and they're saying more or less that we're going to have a Pax Americana. And now this word "aner," again, this is a Proto-Indo-European sound. I don't know what it sounds like, but that's, if you talk to a linguist, they might be able to tell you. But it means the smasher of resistance. And what have they been doing? Well, the first one is already up. Vietnam, more explosives than World War II. Iraq, Gulf War, shock and awe, 40 days and nights. And Yugoslavia, they bombed that poor country for 78 days, 24/7. By this time, we have a new generation of public relations experts on the scene. There's dozens of them. They're making a fortune, millions of dollars from the U.S. government being funded through the CIA. And we don't have time tonight to tell their stories. I'm going to give just a little bit of information on two of them so you have an idea. This is Greg Fuller. He was president of Hill & Knowlton, the world's largest public relations firm. And one of the front organizations he started was Citizens for a Free Kuwait. And remember in the first Gulf War, a lot of you will remember the little 15-year-old girl that was crying. They took the babies out of the incubators and left them on the floor and took the incubators away. Well, that all fell apart eventually, but it worked because it was a highly emotional thing. And they used, he produced many what they call video news releases, but they're fake news, but people think they're really getting real journalism. And these are shown around the world. And often they use the emotionally charged parts of the brain, which is in the limbic system just above the brain stem, so it circumvents the prefrontal cortex where reasoning comes, which is at the front of our forehead, so to speak. They also electrically wired audiences to find out the terminology that would work to get public support behind the war. And what they found worked was this. Hussein is a madman that needed to be stopped, and if he wasn't stopped, irreparable harm would come to the planet. So they repeated that over and over again, and it became almost like a Pied Piper tune. Millions of Americans fell into step because they kept hearing this over and over. You know, the world's going to come to an end. It's almost like a Chicken Little thing.